Hello, welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Today's date is the 17th of April 2014. Welcome to any new listeners, thanks to existing ones again. Truth Sentinel, as I mentioned before, is on the move. We've been through Netherlands, Turkey, we're now in Ukraine. We've been doing a few interviews over here, just settling in at the moment really. Today's news, weather blights South Korea, ferry search. There's obviously a ferry that's gone down near South Korea. 300 people were missing. There are survivors, but still plenty of people missing there in that tragedy. Back to the Ukraine situation. Ukrainian, Russian and Western diplomats have held talks in Switzerland today, hoping to resolve the crisis that seems to be happening in Ukraine, with armed pro-Russian protesters seizing parts of eastern Ukraine. At the moment we're okay here in Odessa, although we have heard that things could start to happen here shortly. It really depends. Nobody knows what's going to happen next really. Putin's very cautious on using force in Ukraine, I've read, but he said it's an exercise that it's his right to do, to send troops into Ukraine, as the talks are going on, continue to go on in Geneva. On the MH370 search, the mini-sub is still looking around, trying to locate those signals, which could have been anything. Today, as mentioned in a little trailer I did, we're going to have an interview with Sarah Bajc, partner of Phillip Wood, so that will come later on in today's episode. We're grateful for her coming to talk to us. Prosecutors have launched a trial in the US against Abu Hamza, who it took about 10 years or more to kick him out of England for preaching a lot of hate speech over here. In the week's news, Berlusconi is going to be doing community service. That should be interesting. The ex-PM of Italy there. Ordered to do 1 year's community service over tax fraud. That's what the courts ruled anyway. It remains to be seen what will happen with that. A girl was allegedly arrested for tweeting a bomb threat. Basically, she threatened or said that there was a bomb, and it was taken quite seriously. And it was said on the news that she was arrested anyway. Now, it might not be long before anti-government comments could get you arrested, or certain opinions will get you arrested. That's certainly something to watch out for anyway. It's already been happening in some cases. Of course, there was the anniversary of the marathon in Boston. I believe that's already taken place. That was the week's news. There's also a blood moon. Did anyone see the blood moon? I didn't get the chance to see that. Back to the Oscar Pistorius trial. We're only casually following it because it's not really a conspiracy or anything that we need to investigate too much, but it is quite interesting. I mean, if some of the other stories in the news were put through the same analysis, then we might get to the truth more often, but mainstream news is, in some cases, not doing that. In other cases they are. I mean, I still use the BBC, CNN, and other sources of media to get some news details. Some of it's correct, some of it I just think could be there could be more investigative journalism. It seems to have disappeared from some forms of media. And if anyone questions an event, they're branded as a conspiracist. You know, that's the problem. A lot of people are being branded conspiracy theorists now, when most of the time it's just people who are asking questions, that's all. 200 schoolgirls were reported abducted in Nigeria. That sounds quite frightening. In an attack on a school in north and eastern Nigeria. That's what the parents said over there. I think it was a place called Chibok in Borno State. And they put all these girls onto lorries and have taken them away. Last time I checked, they hadn't heard any more on their whereabouts. but they're thought to be from the Islamic group Boko Haram. Last episode of Truth Sentinel, we talked about Malaysian Flight MH370, Ukraine, some other general news, HARP, Turkey, and we talked about assassins, government assassins. We'll move on to the main part of today's program in a moment. Remember to leave any ideas for topics in the comments section. We may not do them straight away, but they will be added to the list of things that we want to look at if it's something we feel is worth checking out. I read the comments section. I do take notice of what's in there. Remember also that we'd like to hear from you if you're a listener. We can have a short sort of 2 or 3 minute Skype chat, and we can make a collage of just your opinions on anything that's brought up in the episodes, or anything you want to say. We'll make one episode where we have maybe a collage of some of those. Let's move on to the main part of the show, the search for MH370. It's been in the news for a long time, I know, but we do have Sarah with us today, Sarah Bajc. The interview will be coming later. Just as a bit of background chat about that, let's just see what we know. The plane allegedly changed course because new coordinates were programmed into the computer by someone with knowledge of aviation flight computers. This is some of the information I've been looking at the internet. It could have been, could this have been done remotely by a hacker, either on the plane or on the ground? Either way, it seems it was deliberately diverted for whatever reason. There's definitely questions that should be asked, and it's not being tackled enough. The questions, not all the questions have been asked on mainstream news. They are on some. The last words were from the co-pilot, Farik Abdul Hamid. So it's possible he's involved in some way or other, whether in a bad way or, you know, he may have even tried to save people, who knows, but he was involved. He was the last voice that was heard. The plane allegedly flew on for up to 5 to 7 hours, flying over a number of countries, all supposedly undetected. I think that sounds very unlikely. Although there are reports I saw on the internet that the Thai Air Force said its radar spotted MH370 head into the Strait of Malacca minutes after it vanished, but it didn't really say much more than that. One of the passengers allegedly gave his ring and watch to family in case he didn't come back, which sounds a bit curious. There was also talk of the pilot and the co-pilot having mysterious phone calls before takeoff, etc. I think the plane was almost certainly picked up by military radar, but we haven't heard much about that, radar or satellite. Our attention was initially diverted to objects photographed with blurry satellite images, not the clear ones we've been led to believe are possible, such as the ones shown of Russian planes on the border of Ukraine, although those pictures have incidentally possibly outdated themselves. Then we were told there was pings from black boxes, although definitely not definitely coming from the plane. These have since disappeared. It does seem like a real wild goose chase. It reminds me of a kind of episodes of Lost, the TV series Lost. Like, you just want to see the next one to see what's going to happen next, and nothing quite happens, but and you're not quite sure what the conclusion is, so you watch the next one. That's what it reminds me of. Always seeming to point towards a conclusion, but never actually getting there. We won't talk about the finale of Lost, of course. Some people liked it. As I said, the sad part is that any ideas that differ from the official story are deemed conspiracy theories by some, and that's the kind of attitude we need to try to change. I mean, there are some theories that might be seen as ridiculous, but I really try and shy away from using that word, because everything should be considered. It should be fairly easy to eliminate the ridiculous stories. But people do need to ask questions, and not try and shut people down who do ask questions. I mean, things that were originally seen as conspiracy theories have turned out to be true. I mean, people's minds being wiped by the CIA? Ridiculous nonsense. Actually, no. There's people who've sued the CIA, and it's admitted by the CIA that that went on in the past. Planes flown into two towers in New York, not nonsense, that happened, we all know that. MI5, KGB, CIA, secret organisations doing secret covert operations, that's not nonsense, we all know that that goes on. False flags starting wars, look at the Gulf of Tonkin incident regarding Vietnam. Misinfo, which was apparently misinfo spread by the NSA. UFOs being witnessed by hundreds of people in Phoenix, Nevada. Not nonsense. There was hundreds of people who saw that. They should be listened to. Mothman seen in West Virginia. Not nonsense. That character was seen by quite a number of people. So in a court of law, that would have been something that you would have said happened. The CIA used false witness accounts of the killing of newborn babies to wage war with Iraq. Not nonsense, that happened. And if you think about how disgusting that is, that they used that story and it was not true, then that's, you know, that should give you some idea of the mentality of some of these people. CIA influence in national media towards hatred and fear of Soviet communism in the 50s. That happened. Asbestos was originally said to be safe, turned out later it wasn't, due to people questioning the facts. There's a special heart attack gun that the CIA invented that fires a bullet made of ice that can disappear inside and leave no trace, so thereby killing the person that it's shot at. That's true, check that out if you want. Cancer DNA viruses in polio vaccines. 98 million Americans received one of those within an 8-year period, and there's a polyomavirus called SV40 inside the polio vaccine, and it's estimated that it's said that is can cause cancer, according to tests. Human-animal hybrids being created globally, that's happening. Please do your own research, check out if you're not sure about that. Regarding the global elite wanting to reduce human population on the planet, people like David Rockefeller, Prince Philip, they've openly said that they want that to happen. Also, people like Ted Turner, who said a total world population of 250 to 300 million people. A 95% decline from present levels would be ideal. That ties in with the Georgia Guidestones that we talked about. Okay, whatever you think of Alex Jones, he also said that the NSA was spying on all our phone calls, internet searches, financial transactions. That turned out to be true. Also, Edward Snowden revealed a lot about the NSA and what their spying that they've been doing on us. So, anyway, back to MH370. It's important because the lies and deceptions in the past, we need to make sure that people do question, get to the truth. Don't just let stories disappear from the news and pass us by. There are some reports that MH370 was flown in such a way as to avoid radar, quite low at high speed. There's so many stories about this plane, it must be very difficult for members of the family to actually follow. I had a chance to speak to Sarah Bajc, partner of Phillip Wood, one of the passengers that many people may be familiar with because of various conspiracy theories. And we don't believe all of them. I mean, I think that photograph, I'm a bit dubious about that, to be honest. And I did speak to Sarah about that, or we did discuss that. So let's go and listen to the interview. Thanks again to Sarah for talking to us. And here is the interview. My guest today is Sarah Bajc. Her partner Phillip Wood was a passenger on Malaysian flight MH370, which, as you know, has disappeared. I saw Sarah being interviewed on TV, and I was particularly impressed with how she's dealing with this situation, in continuing to question the official account, at the same time staying logical, remaining hopeful amidst continually changing news surrounding the mysterious disappearance. One thing I would like to ask listeners before I start is that we can all continue to dig for information, ensure that every avenue is investigated by members of the public and anyone involved with the independent media. We're grateful for Sarah spending time with us today on today's show and want to support her in any way we can during this time and let her know that she's not going through this alone, but people are thinking of her and other passengers' families. Hello, Sarah. Thanks for coming on to Truth Sentinel.
Thank you for having me on your show, Scott.
You're most welcome. Let me start with my first question. You have a lot of support from people around the world, including me and listeners of Truth Sentinel. Are you finding any comfort from the support?
Yes, of course. I mean, not only in a concrete visual way of being able to hear people, or visual and audio way of being able to hear people and see people giving their support and validating that you're not crazy to continue to hope and pray for a positive outcome, but also the softer side of it. I really do believe in the power of human connection. And so, you know, when you can raise thousands and hundreds of thousands of voices towards a positive aim. So on many levels, I think it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand why you're holding out hope, because from an emotional point of view, that's important. And at the end of the day, nothing's been found still to this day. So yeah, I think you've got every right to hold on to some hope.
Yeah, we're at almost day 40, just a couple more hours and we'll be at that cross. And there is not a single piece of concrete evidence. And the only circumstantial evidence we have has been, has gone through a very weak chain of command. So it's been passed through the Malaysian government, which means we no longer have confidence that it hasn't been altered in some way before analysis has taken place. So I believe I speak on behalf of most of the families when I say that I have basically zero confidence in the projections and pronouncements that the Malaysian government has given to us.
Okay, yeah. I've noticed from your Facebook page, you've been writing messages to Phillip, and you seem to have quite a special relationship. Can you tell us something about how you met and what makes your relationship so close?
Well, we met a couple of years ago. We had each basically ended long-term marriages. So my divorce was actually already final after 22 years. And he was formally separated and initiating a divorce after 25 years with his ex-wife. And we just kind of ran into each other by accident and kept a friendship at just the beginning. I think we were both a little bit raw around the edges. And then it developed into something more. And it sounds strange. I'm not an overly metaphysical person. I teach business and economics. I had a 22-year career in business. Most people would tell you that I'm an extraordinarily logical and pragmatic person. But, you know, at the age of 46, which was 2 years ago for me, I found my soulmate, and he felt the same way. And so, you know, you go through, you know, several decades of, you know, raising children and figuring out how life works. And then all of a sudden you have this epiphany of what happiness really means. And now just, you know, 2.5 short years later, all of a sudden it's been kind of dashed. It's a bit of a traumatic experience, but I still believe that connection is existing. So I just have to hope that we can continue to push for the truth in solving this just ungodly mystery.
Yeah, would you say that you're becoming more of a spiritual person?
Well, I consider myself to have always been a very spiritual person. Phillip also. is a very spiritual person. He was raised in quite a religious family. I think he embodies his faith very deeply in his heart. And I think my path is a little less traditional, but no less deep. And it was a component of our relationship to be able to connect at that level that goes beyond what you normally experience with people in normal relationships. And it gives you an inkling into the kinds of things that are maybe possible through the human spirit. And whether that's enabled through a higher power or just in our own humanity, I can't make that decision. But, Philip called it quantum entanglement, that we must have shared some atoms from eons beyond, because there was just so many points of connection. It can't have been accidental.
So you have a special connection, and I heard that you were tracking Philip during his flight as well. At what stage did you know something was possibly wrong?
I didn't actually know anything was wrong for sure until several hours after they were supposed to have landed. Usually we stay in very close contact during transport. Either we're traveling together, or if we're traveling apart, we check in, right before boarding, and we check in again right when we land. It's a habit. We both travel a good deal. And this circumstance was very odd because he checked in with me several hours before he left for the airport, but he was very rushed. There had been some confusion over his flight time, and he'd almost missed the flight, and he didn't check in with me right before boarding, which I thought was so odd. And then, so I went to sleep feeling a little ill at ease because that wasn't part of our normal habit. And then, I woke up feeling a little ill at ease. I mean, I've got to admit there were already signs that something was wrong, but I was quite distracted with getting everything packed because we had movers coming that morning. That's why Philip had come in on the red-eye flight, because the movers were supposed to come at 9, so he was supposed to land at 6:30 and be home by 7:38 in order to be here in time for the movers to come with his passport so he could sign off for customs exchange. We're in the process of moving from Beijing to Kuala Lumpur. And, moving between two antagonistic countries is not like moving between two cities in England or two cities in the United States. It's a much more complicated process. And he didn't show up, and the driver was waiting for him, and the pronouncements on the flight board just said the flight was delayed, even though it had taken off on time, and the delay time extended from 1 hour to 2 hours to 3 hours. And then CNN came out with their news announcement that the flight was officially declared missing.
Mm-hmm. And you were moving to Malaysia because Philip was going to start a new job, or you were both starting a new job, is that right?
Yeah, both of us. So we were ready to leave China. I'd been here for 7 years. He'd been here for 2.5. He'd already stayed an extra year to be with me while my youngest son was finishing high school here. And so he was still with the same company, but he was taking a new posting in KL, which started in February. So we'd taken an apartment there in January. And he was to come back here for the month of March to start by getting the shipment on board, on the boat, and then just to hang out here with my son and I for a couple of weeks. And then we were all to return to KL for a week of spring break. So my son and I and Philip together, which we did without him. So I was there 2 weeks ago to finish settling the apartment and take care of closing out his things at his employer, who is, I think, all too ready to put this to bed. It's too much of a hassle for them to deal with. Mm-hmm. And now I'm back here in Beijing because my contract doesn't finish until the end of June. I'm a teacher, so you can't leave your students in the middle of a school year, especially I teach graduating classes who are going through exams. So I have a very real obligation and desire to see it through. I mean, I owe a lot to my students to see them through to good exam results. So so I was to be here through June, and then would be joining him over the summer. And I have a new position already set in KL.
Okay. There's been a lot of analysis about the people on the board, including their jobs, and one of them was in relation to technology patents. I don't know if you've seen about that. Did Philip's job at IBM involve anything that's likely to connect to these stories?
No, I highly doubt it. Philip was in primarily a business development role. He did have a technical background, but I can't believe that over the 2.5 years that I've known him, that he could have possibly kept any kind of nefarious undercover background secret from me. We lived a pretty consolidated and close life together. I do find it suspicious, the density of intellectual property that was sitting on that airplane, not only in people, but also in patent samples and other things. So that is one of the leading theories, is that the plane was taken for the valuable assets that were on board.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other theories. I know it seems clear that you don't necessarily believe the account you're being told by Malaysian authorities. There's been a lot of conspiracy theories. I just wondered, with places like Diego Garcia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Israel, what's your feeling about these? Do you find them annoying? Do you prefer not to speculate about them? How do you feel about them?
Well, I listened to all of them, and I try to assess them intellectually, so from an analytical perspective. There are some that seem to be more valid than others, but there's no one that comes forth as the obvious choice. There are certain of the theories that have surfaced, like there was one about Philip sending a text message, a black picture.
Yeah.
That one is clearly fake. I mean, even without knowing Philip, any intelligent person can look at the content of that message and say,
Yeah, absolutely. I must admit, the things that were said in that message, it sounds almost like a joke,
Yeah, like perfect grammar, perfect spelling, capitalization and punctuation. Somebody who's blindfolded and drugged knows that their captors are military people. I mean, really, come on. I mean, but separate from that, the reality is that Philip and I texted and Skyped and every other means of communication back and forth with each other on a regular basis, sometimes hourly. And he never would have written something so structured and formal. It would have been very ad hoc. So in a time of crisis, that would have been worse, not better. And there's no way he would have referred to his employer before he would have referred to me. So, I mean, I'm sure that's a hoax. Now, is Diego Garcia involved? I don't know. I mean, I'm an American. I like to think that my country would not be involved in something like this, and that it seems too far-fetched for that airplane to have been landed on that island. But the reality is, the United States, just like many other countries, has been involved in some pretty awful stuff over the last, couple hundred years, right?
Yeah.
There's, a lot of bad behavior by bad people. It doesn't mean the United States is a bad place. I love my country. I'm proud to be an American. But the reality is we have had some pretty scary stuff happen, whether that's, in recent times, the cover-ups in the 9/11 escapade, the things that led up to the whole Iraq War issue and what Bush was fabricating there. You've got in further history, you've got the Vietnam era, you've got the Iran-Contra scenarios, Watergate. I mean, you name it, there's been bad people doing bad things. So it's always a possibility. I mean, there's no proof. The government certainly has not come forward with any kind of defense or proof to the contrary. So we have to keep that as an open possibility.
And I heard on CNN that you mentioned about the possibility there might have been jet fighters tailing the plane. Are you still sticking to that? I mean, did you get any information about that at all?
I've not been able to validate that. That was purely a statement made by one of the family members at the family briefing in Kuala Lumpur that I had gone to a couple weeks ago, which is the only one I've ever gone to. I've never gone to any of them here in Beijing. I do live in Beijing, China. I prefer to steer clear of that media circus. And I didn't go to any of the other gatherings in KL either, for much the same reason. It's interesting because I've done a lot of international press. I mean, I'm all over CNN and NBC and ABC and CBS and the Wall Street Journal and now your show as well. But the reality is, in China and in Malaysia, very few people are watching the international news. So I can be quite anonymous. I mean, I have absolutely no concern about being recognized walking down the street here in Beijing or even in KL. But if I would have shown up at any of those conferences, then I would have been recognized because the local media pay attention to those.
Right, okay, yeah. I wanted to ask you about your feelings about, the search is currently being investigated in the areas with the submersibles, etc. And that was because of the Inmarsat calculations over the ping data. How do you feel about that situation at the moment? I mean, do you feel that they could have made a miscalculation there?
Well, I've been having some exchanges with who I believe to be quite a validated mathematician, and he has a number of other mathematicians and physicists who work with him in his calculations. But his name is Duncan Steele, based out of Australia. And according to the data he's been provided, now the big caveat is here that the data he's been provided may or may not be the real data, right? So we don't have any confidence that the data being released for analysis is actually the real raw data, because everything is filtering through Malaysia, and we don't know what kind of modification they might be making. We are all very, very suspect of the Malaysian government at this point. But regardless of the data that he's received, he has challenged the assessments being made, that there are some mathematical formula errors, as an example, and that the northern route is just as likely, if not more likely, than the southern route that was determined to be the more obvious choice, as evidenced by the March 24th pronouncement of the leaders within Malaysia of saying that the flight was lost and it was in the ocean. So, if we have multiple independent experts in the calculation of moving masses through air, so this is what these people specialize in, right? And they're all saying, they've made mistakes in their calculations, then we should be listening to that. And, not only from a purely mathematical model, a pure maths modeling perspective, but also just some knowledge of how flight autopilots work, that if, separate from the calculations, which could go either way, one of the things that Duncan had stated is he said, look, autopilots are a computer system. And if indeed that computer system went through some catastrophic failure, it would reboot itself, just like anything else reboots itself. Your computer, when it gets to the blue screen, it reboots itself. And when a flight data autopilot goes through a reboot cycle, it defaults to 360, which happens to be due north. So, separate from the fact that the calculations themselves could go either way, you take that extra piece of data in there and say, so if it was catastrophic failure, north would make more sense than south. And if it wasn't catastrophic failure, if it was indeed manned, then north still makes a lot of sense, because if you're taking a plane for some purpose, why would you just put it into the water? You know, you're going to take it and do something with it,
Yeah.
which means you're going to have to put it onto land someplace.
And it would have been tracked as well. That's the other curious thing. I mean, it's very unlikely that it's true that it wasn't tracked by anyone.
Well, either direction, though, because whether you're going north or south, it still would have flown over airspace of multiple countries, and nobody's saying anything.
Yeah, when the Malaysians announced that they said the plane had crashed with no survivors, that was very suspect as well. That was really odd, I thought. What did you think when they said that?
I thought it was cruel, and it was clearly intentional to have that impact. I mean, there's no way a normal thinking person attempting to do the right thing would have possibly made that set of statements. You know, they had no fact, they had no corroboration from anybody else. They just came out and made the statement. And it, to me, you know, my immediate impression was to crash, because I was already so on the edge anyway that it just kind of tipped me over. But once I'd had a chance to think about it a little bit and talk to people, you know, my youngest son is 17, and he's actually much more clear-headed, I think, than adults sometimes are. And he said, "But you know, Mom, they didn't tell you anything new. All they did is package it into something that is probably serving their purpose. And so if they're looking to close the inquiry down because they want to settle up with insurance and go about their lives and be done with this hassle, well, then that pronouncement maybe made some sense."
Yeah, I mean, it's very unlikely a plane can fly for 5 to 7 hours without being tracked by radar. I mean, was the hijack situation still being considered in the last couple of weeks, or has it been totally ruled out now?
Well, based on what the officials are doing, I mean, based on the fact that they're exploring only that little piece of the ocean, they seem to have ruled it out. From the standpoint of the families and, you know, the mass support. So, you know, I run a couple of Facebook pages. I've got my own personal page. It's just called Sarah Bajc. It's my personal communication site for friends and family, and I write messages to Phillip. It's not news-oriented at all. And then there's another site called Finding Phillip Wood, and that page is quite dedicated to the efforts of discovering the truth. So, you know, we've had almost, I think we're up, I'd have to go back and retotal, but I think it's closing in on more than 2 million hits and like 36,000 likes in only 4 weeks. And that means we're getting some critical mass of people who are all thinking about this problem. And the general consensus is that something is being, you know, been pulled over us, that there's a conspiracy of some sort, you know, even if it's just to cover up incompetence, there's some cover up of some sort.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case. I would imagine if you're getting so many hits to your site, you must be getting contacted both with people who might have some valid information, but also maybe people who have coming up with some crazy stories as well. Are you finding it easy to sift between those?
Well, we have about a dozen volunteers, so it's all a volunteer effort with mostly friends and family who do watch the postings. And at the beginning, I'll tell you, the first week or two, we had just a bunch of crazies. I mean, you know, psychics trying to sell their services and people trying to scam money and take donations, which our site would never do. We accept no donations whatsoever, except in the form of information and help. And so we had to shut a bunch of them down. Even a couple of them got reported to the FBI because of their egregiousness. But the vast majority, I mean, 99.9% are very positive and supportive. And as we're getting further into this mystery, we're starting to get more concrete content. So, you know, one of our efforts, it's not just to be a social therapy site, which, you know, honestly, at the beginning, it was very useful for that. At least for me, I needed a place to have outlet for my emotion. But now we're starting to try to gather concrete input. So people who have connections into the government and people who have connections in other countries to please come forward and offer suggestions and offer context and connections, and even, you know, even just practical help. Like, you know, how do we turn all of this data into a readable infographic that people can understand? Well, I don't have the expertise to do that, but we've had a group at one of the local universities in Atlanta volunteer a whole class, like 50 students, of people who specialize in imaging data. And, you know, they're working on this as a class project. So, I mean, that's an example of how people can help.
That's really nice to hear, actually, that you're getting such positive feedback then. That's quite comforting for everyone, I think.
Yeah, it's a way to find some good out of this terrible mess.
Have you heard any particularly important news in the last day or so that hasn't been reported on the mainstream news?
No, the mainstream news is my news. You know, the reality is I get nothing from the official sources that isn't already on CNN or somebody else.
Okay, and what's your thoughts on the signals that that were reported coming from the potential black boxes, but probably could be anything? They seem to have disappeared now, and they've put the submersibles in. It does seem a bit like a wild goose chase, that they keep almost finding something, then not finding something. What's your feeling at this stage?
My feeling has stayed fairly consistent, that I feel that we are being intentionally misled and guided down a path of being distracted from the real issue. It's just too perfectly orchestrated to be accidental, you know. Everybody just gives up interest, and then some little piece comes to keep us paying attention to this distraction over here on the right, while over here on the left, whatever is really happening is going on. You know, I personally think that in the end, we're going to find that there's some deeper issue at play, whether it's part of the Russian invasion activities, or it's part of China's rise to power, or it's part of the U.S. covering something up. You know, as far as I'm concerned, every single party could be guilty. I don't have a particular dominant theory, but I just cannot believe that this is an accident.
No, I think a lot of people would agree with you on that one. Is there anything any of us can do to help you, listeners of Truth Sentinel, anyone listening to this program, or anyone in general that might hear about your situation and the families? Is there anything any of us can do to help you? Would you like to make an appeal about anything?
Well, if anybody knows anything at all about how searches for missing airplanes work, or radar or cell phone coverage tracking works, or how we might be able to influence the governments, and I say governments meaning very open-ended, any government to be influenced, to keep the search alive. I mean, this is not just about the 239 missing passengers. This is about the fact that a major commercial airline has been stolen. And, you know, there are 8 million people every single day who fly on commercial airlines. We should all be very, very worried about the fact that one could just disappear. So we need to keep it alive. And, you know, the one tool that we have to organize people into that is the Finding Phillip Wood Facebook page. So if people could go to that page and like it, so that they're following our news feeds, and contribute what they know to be true, or their connections, you can do so, you know, offline or online, then we'll at least try to keep the story alive and figure out what happened.
Okay, thank you. I really hope that you do find some answers soon, and I hope if anyone is listening that can help, please go to that Facebook page, find him Phillip Wood, and give any information you can. Thanks ever so much for coming on Truth Sentinel today, Sarah. We really appreciate it, and we are thinking of you, and we really support you. And if ever you want to come back on, then please do. And just thank you so much for coming on.
Great. Thank you, Scott.
Okay, goodbye. So great to talk to Sarah Bajc there. From MH370, we're going to move on to Ukraine. Now, before I do, I just wanted to say that I did speak to Sarah before the interview and after the interview, and I'll be putting some of the excerpts from that conversation in the next episode, because we talked about a lot more as well. And with her permission, I'll put some of that in the next episode. Okay, but I also want to talk about Ukraine. I'm here in Odessa at the moment. Life is continuing fairly as normal, although I have heard reports that some people have started putting barricades on the roads in some areas. Some of my friends who live here have started to pack up their things. They're moving out because Odessa has been mentioned in the news as a potential target for Putin. It's one of the largest cities in Ukraine, and it's a seaport, so it definitely is a potential target. So I may be starting to move out of here myself soon. I'm just going to see what's going to be happening in the next few days. Obviously, developments here all the time in Ukraine. Since the Ukrainian army have been taking part in an operation to deal with the takeover of buildings in the east. Whilst here, I did have a chance to speak to Alexander, just a normal Ukrainian based in Odessa. He works on ships. I wanted to speak to normal people in Ukraine, just people on the streets, and get people's opinions. I met Alexander at a wedding party that I stumbled across whilst in Odessa here. So Alexander kindly agreed to talk with me. He's a seaman from Odessa, so he works on ships. He said that he's basically worked in other countries, such as he told me he helped dredge the Thames, or the part of the Thames nearer the sea, anyway, in London. So me and Alexander met in a cafe to do this interview. So if you hear any noise in the background, that's why. We just come back from a coffee break after doing the first part of the interview, which I may put some parts of that in next week's episode. The sound quality wasn't so good, so I'm just putting the second part first of all. So we just come back from a coffee break, and here's Alexander. Okay, we're back from our coffee break, and the next question I wanted to ask is to go back in time a little bit and just ask you, before all this happened, what did you think of Yanukovych?
Mr. Yanukovych, ex-president already. I didn't like him, never, because just he feels like maybe it sounds not polite, but he feels like not educated person. I didn't like his actions, and I didn't like his party actions. What were happening all around Ukraine by covering his political party. So I really don't like Mr. Yanukovych.
Do you think there's any chance he'll come back again, or try to come back again?
Well, I don't really know, because there's always chance. Maybe he'll try, but as said Mr. Putin a few weeks ago, politically he's dead. Because even his the citizens who was voting for him, they said like, yeah, he ran away, we don't like him as well, but not 100% of them, of course. But his party is still alive in Ukraine, and they trying to get back in the power. Of course, that's normal for a political party. But I believe Mr. Yanukovych will never come back.
And what do you think of the current president?
The current president, well, I think he got his chair in a really bad time. and there's also some questions to him, but I think in this time we have to support him because majorly he do well.
There's some people that would say that he was put there by the EU, like he's more of a supporter, or they're more of a supporter of him, and maybe Yanukovych was kind of almost Russian. What would you say about that?
Well, I wouldn't say he was placed by Euro Union in his chair, but that's true, that's understandable. He is more pro-European politic than Mr. Yanukovych. Yanukovych was completely pro-Russian politic, and Ukraine, the country, last, I don't know, 15 years maybe, always switching from one way to another, from Russian way to European way, by switching presidents and governments. And finally we got pro-European government, and of course Russia didn't like it. They don't like it yet. That's it.
Do you think any of the problems that we've seen happening could spread to Odessa at any point?
Well, that's possible. If we talk about the same situation like we have in Eastern Europe nowadays, that's still possible. Only we have to understand what the people in Eastern Europe, they are mixed with, that's just my opinion, they are mixed with the Russian, let's say, secret service officers or something, to make a bit messy situation and bring up the people for striking against Ukraine. And eastern part of Ukraine was always pro-Russian, always. And that's more easy to do over there than in Odessa, because Odessa like 50-50 by my view. And in Odessa they will always have problems, I mean the Russians will have always problems with pro-Ukrainian part of Odessa. But that's still possible.
Do you think something good could come out of this situation, or do you think it's going to end in something bad?
Well, for now, there's one thing what I see from this really bad situation. That's Ukraine got really Ukrainian nation. People become more Ukrainians who feels like Ukrainians. Because I live in Odessa already for 12 years. I never seen so many Ukrainian flags, and it feels like Ukrainian city. It makes me happy, but all the rest, it's really bad, and it's almost civil war in Eastern Europe. Almost. It's not yet, but it's almost.
Okay, thank you very much for speaking to us today, Alexander, and maybe you'll come back and speak to us again later on as things develop.
Yeah, you're always welcome to ask me some questions. I'm always ready to answer.
Thank you.
So thanks again to Alexander, and we'll be having more interviews whilst in Ukraine. We'll be checking in with Anthony next week as well. I think he might be doing a review or an interview with someone. There has been a lot of alarming talk in the news about weather lately, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on that too. What's the sudden increase in reporting on weather pollution and some strange weather phenomenon? Something seems to be up to me. I don't know. What do you think? Basically, also, next episode we'll be talking about lots of other subjects. The sort of subjects we'll be covering in general will be all kinds of interesting news about mysteries, paranormal activities. We'll be covering topics such as the typical conspiracy theories like 9/11. We're looking at sound weapons, the Illuminati, genetic engineering, looking at potential for World War III. Obviously this is a potential in Ukraine here as well. If you have any comments or any anything you want us to talk about, please remember to put them in the comments section. Please check out our new Twitter page. which is now up and running. I have this week listened to Caravan to Midnight with John B. Wells, Hagman and Hagman, Alex Jones. John B. Wells' episode was quite good. Can't remember the lady's name. They were also talking about MH370, and this lady had a theory about that. It sounded reasonably credible because it wasn't too crazy. It was just kind of like basically that the Chinese, when they released their original satellite image, that was actually the correct location of the plane, but then they diverted attention to another area because they were trying to cover something up there. Anyway, I don't know where she got her information from. Also, we're always looking for sponsors, advertisers, anyone who would like to finance this channel, because at the moment it's run on a zero budget, and I've been making some inroads into trying to find sponsorship so we can do more research and actually dedicate time to doing this full time and travel around, because I do have a day job as well. Thanks again for listening, and thanks again for the positive comments you always seem to leave. Catch you later. Have a good week.